Imagine discovering that even within the highest echelons of power, truth can be manipulated, hidden, silenced. Ethan Walsh, a lawyer accustomed to dealing with corruption cases, finds his life turned upside down when he agrees to investigate what seems like a straightforward death. But the evidence starts to reveal something darker, a vast scheme involving secret contracts, covered-up deaths, and a mogul whose influence stretches beyond the law. As Ethan uncovers dangerous secrets, he quickly realizes he's dealing with forces much larger than he expected. Now, he's racing against time. Every wrong choice could be fatal. The deeper he digs, the more dangerous it becomes. After all, how far can someone go to expose the truth when the system itself seems compromised? Are you ready to follow Ethan to the limit? Ethan Walsh was used to handling corruption cases in the heart of New York City. But when he received a call from an old FBI colleague, something in the tone of the voice made him realize that this case would be different. The conversation was brief, direct, but enough to pique his curiosity. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what was to come. On the other side of the city, an influential executive from the pharmaceutical industry had been found dead in his luxury apartment. Officially, it was a suicide. Unofficially, suspicion pointed elsewhere. The FBI investigation was underway, but some forces seemed to be working in the shadows to close the case before it even began. Ethan knew that by accepting the offer to represent the case, he was stepping into something much bigger. The first meeting with the client, Raymond Lewis, the victim's brother, took place in Ethan's modern and sophisticated office. Raymond was visibly shaken. He had a lost look, as if the shock was still fresh, but something in his rigid posture gave him away. It wasn't just grief. There was fear. "Ethan, I need you to understand. My brother, he wouldn't have killed himself," Raymond said, his voice hoarse and trembling. "He was dealing with pressures, sure, but nothing that would justify this. Something is wrong. Very wrong." Ethan watched him in silence, knowing he needed to choose his words carefully. "Raymond, the FBI is conducting an investigation. Are there any signs that your brother was involved in something beyond the pharmaceutical industry? Anything that hasn't been disclosed?" Raymond hesitated for a moment, running his hands over his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. "There was something about contracts that shouldn't exist. He told me he was being pressured by powerful figures. Politicians, investors, people who don't want to be seen." Ethan felt the weight of the revelation. The suicide of a high-profile executive would be enough to draw attention, but secret contracts and powerful figures? That smelled like conspiracy. That night, Ethan sat at his office desk, delving into piles of documents Raymond had brought. Each sheet seemed more mundane than the last, but he knew that's how these things worked. Answers were never on the surface. As he sifted through the papers, a series of financial transactions caught his eye. Absurd amounts of money were flowing from offshore accounts to shell companies. It was a classic move. Money laundering. The kind of operation that required a level of sophistication only large corporations, and their allies in government, could orchestrate. But what had led to the murder? And why did the FBI seem so cautious in handling the case? As Ethan progressed through the documents, one name kept coming up: Nicholas Stein, a media mogul with enough influence to control not just narratives but entire investigations. The connection between Stein and the deceased executive was clear. They shared investments and, it appeared, secrets. Ethan leaned back in his chair, processing the information. He knew he was dealing with something bigger than a mere suicide case. The problem was, the deeper he dug, the riskier it became. Nicholas Stein was notorious for crushing anyone who threatened his interests, and Ethan knew that by pressing on, he was entering dangerous territory where justice didn't always prevail. But what truly bothered him was the FBI's stance. Why was a case with such implications being handled so slowly? Something seemed to be hidden, and Ethan wouldn't stop until he uncovered what it was. Ethan knew his next step would be to seek out the FBI agent who had contacted him. John Heller was known for his rigid ethics, a man who rarely got involved in political conspiracies or power games. But when Ethan met him that morning in a secluded cafe away from the city center, Heller's expression was grim, almost paranoid. "I thought you were trying to help me solve this case, John," Ethan began, pulling up a chair. "What's going on here?" Heller glanced around as if expecting to be watched. After a long silence, he leaned forward. "Ethan, you don't understand what you're getting into. This isn't a normal case. The forces behind this are bigger than any of us. The FBI has been instructed to tread carefully." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Instructed by whom?" Heller let out a sigh and ran a hand through his gray hair. "Politicians, corporations, people you can't even imagine. They're all interconnected. Tyler Lewis's death wasn't an accident, let alone a suicide. But proving that? Well, you're going to encounter many obstacles. Ethan leaned in, his voice low and firm. So tell me what you know. Heller hesitated for a moment, then, reluctantly, began to speak. Tyler was working on a secret project with the government. Something big, linked to experimental pharmaceutical contracts. Large-scale trials, and some of those trials were ethically questionable. Nicholas Stein had a massive interest in this project, not just for the profits, but for controlling the media and the information that would come from it. When Tyler started hesitating, threatening to expose what was happening, he became a problem. Ethan was silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the revelation. Illegal government contracts, powerful corporations, and a compromised media. It sounded like the kind of conspiracy you see in movies, but he knew that, in the real world, these conspiracies were even more dangerous. So you think it was Stein? Ethan asked, trying to piece together the information. Stein or someone very close to him. But proving that, Heller shook his head. They have the media, the money, and even the government on their side. If you continue with this investigation, you'll be on your own. Ethan stared at Heller, feeling the weight of the warning but also feeling a spark of determination ignite within him. If I don't do it, who will? Heller shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. I just hope you know what you're getting into, Ethan. As Ethan left the cafe, Heller's words echoed in his mind. The agent's fear and reluctance were further confirmation that he was dealing with something much larger than a mere murder. But Ethan knew that to uncover the truth, he would need more than just courage. He would need allies. Back at the office, he started thinking about who could help him dig up what was hidden. He called Claire Mitchell, an investigative journalist he had worked with on a case in the past. Claire was known for her media connections and her talent for extracting confidential information from sources who preferred to remain anonymous. Claire, I need your help, he said, without preamble, when she answered the phone. About what? Claire asked, her tone full of curiosity. Nicholas Stein. He's neck-deep in something big, and Tyler Lewis's death is just the tip of the iceberg. Claire was silent for a moment. Stein? She laughed incredulously. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? This guy doesn't mess around, Ethan. I know. And that's why I need someone with the guts to poke this hornet's nest. After a brief pause, Claire sighed. All right, I'm in. But know that once we start digging into this, there's no turning back. Ethan knew she was right. Entering Stein's world was like stepping into a minefield. But he also knew he couldn't ignore what he had uncovered. Tyler Lewis's death would not be in vain. And with Claire by his side, he might have a chance to expose the truth behind the conspiracy involving some of the most powerful men in the country. The call with Claire brought a mix of relief and apprehension. He knew that with her by his side, he would have a relentless ally. However, the feeling of poking a sleeping giant intensified. Ethan was aware that Stein was not just any magnate. He had a network that extended to every corner, from the media to the darkest corridors of political power. 2 days later, Claire showed up at his office, her hair pulled back into a ponytail and a notebook in hand, ready to dive in. Look, Ethan, I made a few calls, she said, wasting no time. There's some strange movement behind the scenes. Powerful people are buying silence at any cost. I spoke with one of my sources at the Herald, and they told me that several articles about Tyler's death were killed by editors under direct orders. And guess who has a stake in the paper? She looked straight at him, already knowing he had the answer. Nicholas Stein, Ethan finished, exasperated. Claire nodded and continued. This goes way beyond a simple cover-up. We're dealing with a massive information control operation. And there's more. She placed the notebook on the desk. I got access to a list of meetings Tyler had in the weeks leading up to his death. He was in contact with an influential senator, Adam Westmore. Any idea why? Ethan frowned. Westmore was known for his strong stance against excessive corporate control, but he also had a reputation for being fickle and, when pressured, he knew how to give in to certain influences. Westmore has been a critic of secret government contracts, Ethan reflected. Maybe Tyler was trying to ensure that someone in a position of power would take action. That's what it seems like, Claire said, her tone serious. But if Westmore was involved, then someone silenced him. He hasn't made a single public comment since Tyler died. He's disappeared from the media. Then we need to find him, Ethan said, determined. If Westmore knew something, he could be the missing piece to bringing down Stein and his network. I agree, but it won't be easy. If he's hiding, there's a very strong reason. We could be talking about death threats, blackmail, or worse, Claire warned, her gaze filled with concern. That night, Ethan began to feel the true weight of the battle he had started. After hours of sifting through financial information, connecting loose ends, and making calls, he realized there wasn't much time before the net closed in. Claire, on the other hand, was her usual tireless self, sending messages to her sources, digging up hidden information. Stein doesn't play fair, she said, her eyes fixed on the computer screen. Every time someone tried to expose him, something mysterious always happened. Journalists disappear, evidence vanishes, investigations evaporate. It won't be any different for us. Ethan knew she was right, but it only made him more determined. There was no turning back now. As Tyler's documents continued to reveal layers of fraud and corruption, one specific discovery made his heart race. It was a signature on a confidential contract, a clause that directly tied one of the largest public health agencies in the United States to a scheme for fast-tracking drug approvals without proper oversight. That was the missing link. The next morning, Ethan and Claire met again. She had managed to track down Adam Westmore's whereabouts. The senator was reclusive at a secluded property on the outskirts of Vermont. Knowing time was short, Ethan decided they needed to get there as quickly as possible. If Westmore knows anything, he might be the only one who can bring down Stein, Ethan said as he closed the folder with the incriminating documents. And we need to do it before he disappears for good. Claire agreed, but before they could leave, Ethan's phone rang. He answered, and the voice on the other end was grave, almost a whisper. You need to stop, Ethan. You're dealing with forces you don't understand. This is the last warning. Ethan was silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing. Who are you? He asked, but the line had already gone dead. Claire looked at him with concern. They're threatening you, aren't they? Yes, and that means we're on the right track. The two exchanged glances, aware that the fight had only just begun, and that from this point on, there would be no turning back. The silence on the road as Ethan and Claire drove to Vermont was almost suffocating. Both knew they were venturing into dangerous territory, but meeting Senator Adam Westmore could be the final piece to unravel the conspiracy. The tension in the air was palpable, and with every mile they passed, Ethan mentally reviewed the critical points of the case. Do you think he'll really tell us anything? Claire asked, finally breaking the silence. Ethan gripped the steering wheel and replied without taking his eyes off the road. He knows more than he's letting on. If he's hiding, it's because he fears for his life. I just hope he's still willing to talk. After hours on the road, they arrived at the isolated property. Westmore's country house was set in a remote area, surrounded by dense trees and an overgrown gravel driveway. Ethan parked the car in front of the main gate, which was slightly ajar. The place had an air of abandonment, and Claire, cautious, got out of the car first. It looks deserted, she observed, looking around. I'm not surprised. If he's here, he's keeping an extremely low profile. They walked up to the entrance, where a light breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. When they knocked on the door, there was no response. Ethan looked at Claire, who shrugged. He knocked again, louder this time. After a few seconds of silence, the door finally opened a crack, and Adam Westmore appeared. His eyes were hollow, with heavy dark circles, as if he hadn't slept in days. What do you want? He asked, his voice hoarse and almost inaudible. We need to talk, Senator, Ethan began, keeping his composure. We know you have information about Tyler Lewis's death and the contracts he was dealing with. Westmore opened the door a little wider, but his expression was laden with suspicion. You shouldn't have come. You have no idea what you're meddling with. Ethan and Claire exchanged a quick glance before Westmore let them in. The interior of the house was as dark as the exterior, with piles of papers scattered across a wooden table in the center of the room. Westmore closed the door behind them and moved to a nearby chair, where he sat with a heavy sigh. You know what happened to Tyler, don't you? Claire asked, breaking the ice. The senator remained silent for a few moments, running his trembling hands over his face. I know, but I can't prove it. They are too powerful. Stein and his allies, they control everything. If you oppose them, you disappear. Ethan moved closer, leaning forward, trying to reach Westmore in some way. Then talk to us, Senator. We can protect you. If you expose what you know, we can dismantle this network before they do the same to you. Westmore laughed bitterly. Protect? There is no protection against them. You have no idea what's at stake. Stein controls the media, the government, even the public health agencies are in his pocket. Tyler tried to expose this, tried to alert about the fraudulent tests, the illegal contracts, but before he could do anything, they silenced him. He stopped, taking a deep breath, as if reliving the trauma of being involved in something much larger than he could control. And I'm next. So you confirm it was a murder? Ethan asked, his voice laden with urgency. Westmore nodded slowly. Yes. Tyler knew too much. He thought that because of who he was, he would be protected. But Stein is ruthless. When he realized Tyler was about to expose everything, he acted quickly. Claire exchanged a quick glance with Ethan, aware that this was the evidence they needed. But before they could press Westmore for more details, a metallic noise from outside interrupted the conversation. Ethan was the first to move, running to the window to look outside. Amid the shadows between the trees, he saw the silhouettes of two men, both in dark suits, approaching the house. "We have company," he said in a low voice, pulling Claire and Westmore back to the center of the room. The senator turned pale. "They're here to silence me," Ethan thought quickly. He knew the men outside were not there for a simple conversation. They were there to eliminate any chance of Westmore exposing what he knew. With no time to come up with a more elaborate plan, Ethan looked at Claire. "We need to get out of here, now." Westmore hesitated, fear written all over his face, but before they could react, the front door burst open with a kick, and the men stormed in with their weapons drawn. Ethan threw himself to the floor, dragging Claire down with him. Westmore tried to run but was quickly subdued by one of the men. "You thought you could escape?" one of the attackers said, grabbing the senator by the collar. Claire tried to pull something from her bag, but Ethan stopped her, signaling that it wasn't the right moment to act. They needed an opening. They needed to find a way out without getting killed. Desperate, Westmore looked at Ethan and Claire, silently pleading for help. "What do you want?" Ethan shouted, trying to distract the men while searching for an escape route. "We want Westmore's silence," said the other man, with a cold smile. "And you too should do the same, if you know what's good for you." Ethan knew this was their only chance. Time was running out, and a wrong decision could be fatal. The sharp crack of a gun hitting Westmore's face echoed through the room, causing Claire to hold her breath. The senator fell to the ground, his lips swelling rapidly as the two men kept him under constant surveillance. Ethan realized he was racing against the clock, and that any rash attempt could result in their deaths. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said, raising his hand slowly, trying to appear harmless. "We can resolve this another way." The man who seemed to be the leader smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was tall, with a square jaw and a scar running down the side of his face. The scar gave the impression that he was always smiling, a sinister smile that never faded. "We're not paid to handle things amicably, Mr. Walsh." The man's voice was deep, almost a growl. "Our job is to ensure Westmore doesn't say another word. And you too," he paused, eyeing Ethan and Claire with calculating eyes. "Well, you two should disappear." Claire, sitting on the floor next to Ethan, tried to stay calm, but Ethan could feel her tension rising. He knew Claire wasn't the type to handle threats to her life well. Not that anyone did, but Claire had a strength that, under pressure, could lead to impulsive decisions. "This is a mistake," Ethan continued, trying to keep the conversation flowing. "Do you think you'll get away with this? We have enough evidence to link Stein directly to all of this. If you kill us, someone will expose everything. I'm not the only one who knows what's going on." The scarred man paused for a moment, weighing Ethan's words, but before he could respond, the second man, shorter but equally menacing, moved toward Westmore and pulled a knife from his pocket. "We're not here to negotiate," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Without warning, the man lifted the knife and pressed it against the senator's throat, who gasped in panic. The metallic glint reflected off the blade made Ethan think quickly. There was no time for talk. "Wait!" Claire shouted unexpectedly. She pulled something from her bag and threw it toward the shorter man. The object, a small canister of pepper spray, hit the assailant in the face. He recoiled, shouting and covering his eyes. It was the opening Ethan needed. Without hesitation, Ethan lunged at the scarred man, grabbing his wrist before he could draw the weapon. They rolled on the floor, the weight of the other man crushing him against the wooden floor as they struggled for the gun. Claire, seizing the chaos, ran to Westmore and tried to lift him. But he was in shock, his face pale and eyes wide, as if he had already resigned to his fate. The second man, still dazed from the spray, was trying to recover, but his swollen eyes made it difficult to see. Claire pulled Westmore harder, nearly dragging him to the door. Ethan, still grappling with the scarred man, felt the pressure increase as the assailant tried to reach for the fallen gun. Then a shot echoed through the room. The muffled sound of the shot made Ethan's body freeze for a second. The scarred man stopped fighting, and Ethan saw blood starting to seep through the attacker's shirt. The gun was in Westmore's hands, who, with trembling hands, had fired the shot. The man fell to the ground, his body now lifeless, while the second attacker, still partially blinded, groped his way toward the door. "Let's go!" Ethan shouted, grabbing Westmore by the arm as he pulled him out of the house. Claire was already outside, her eyes wide with adrenaline. They ran to the car, their hands shaking as they tried to unlock the doors. When everyone was finally inside the vehicle, Ethan sped off, the sound of the tires crushing the gravel under the car echoing around them. As they pulled away from the house, the sound of sirens in the distance began to fill the air. Claire looked at Ethan, still breathless. "They were waiting for us," she said. "That means someone knew we were coming." Ethan nodded, his heart still racing. That means we're closer to the truth. And now, they're going to come after us with everything they've got. As the car moved away from the property, Ethan knew that from that moment on, there would be no safe place. The only option now was to fight until the end. As the car sped down the winding road, the silence among Ethan, Claire, and Westmore was only interrupted by the sound of the engine and everyone's heavy breathing. The adrenaline was still pumping, but there was a collective awareness that they were on a collision course with powerful forces. Stein wouldn't be content with just trying to silence them, he would come at them with everything he had. "What do we do now?" Claire asked, still keeping her eyes on the road ahead. "They know where we are. And they know what we know." Ethan, at the wheel, clenched his jaw, focused on thinking quickly. The next step had to be precise. They couldn't keep running without a plan. Westmore, in the back seat, seemed to be emotionally collapsing. His senator's rigid posture had now given way to a man overcome with fear and uncertainty. "We need to do this the right way," Ethan finally replied, his voice firm but with a hint of fatigue. "If we run to the police, they might be compromised. If we try to go to the media, Stein controls what gets out. Our only option now is to find someone who can't be bought, someone from inside the government who has enough power to protect Westmore and ensure the evidence reaches the public." "And who the hell would that be?" Claire asked, incredulous. "All the bridges are burned. The media is in Stein's hands, the FBI is afraid to touch this, and the government, well, the government is more compromised than anyone." Ethan glanced quickly in the rearview mirror, staring at the senator who seemed to be sinking further into the back seat. "Westmore, do you know anyone we can trust?" Ethan asked. "Any ally in the Senate, someone who isn't part of this machine?" Westmore shook his head, disheartened, but after a few seconds of hesitation, he raised his head, his eyes slightly more alive. "There is one person," he said, his voice low and trembling. "Senator Grace Holloway. She's always been an adversary of Stein, never gave in to his political or financial pressure. If there's anyone who can help us bring down this conspiracy, it's her." Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Grace Holloway was known for her integrity. One of the few public figures seemingly immune to corruption, Holloway had a reputation for fiercely fighting against corporate control and the forces manipulating the system. She might be exactly the person they needed. "We need to get in touch with her," Ethan decided. "But we can't do it directly. If Stein or his allies realize we're trying to involve her, she'll become a target too." "We don't have much time," Claire murmured. "They're already after us, and after what happened today, they're going to turn up the heat." Ethan knew Claire was right. Every passing minute brought them closer to danger. He veered the car onto a small secondary road, moving away from the main route. "Let's switch cars and disappear for a while," he said. "We need to buy time until we can safely reach Senator Holloway." They found a secluded motel off the highway. The place was dilapidated, with flickering neon signs and an unsettling silence all around. It was exactly the kind of place where they could temporarily hide. Ethan parked the car in the back, out of sight from the road, and the three of them entered the cramped room, locking the door behind them. Inside the room, the atmosphere was heavy. Westmore sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes hollow, while Claire began searching her laptop for a secure way to contact Holloway. "I've got a secure line," she said a few minutes later. "We can try sending an encrypted message to the senator. But we need to make sure she understands this is serious. She won't risk getting involved if she doesn't know how deep this goes." Ethan nodded and began dictating the message that Claire typed frantically. They explained the risk Westmore was facing, Stein's involvement and media control, as well as the fraudulent government contracts. The message was clear: they needed Holloway's help to expose everything. When they finished, they sent the encrypted file to the senator's personal email, hoping she would respond quickly. As they waited in silence, every second seemed to drag. Westmore, staring at the floor, began to speak quietly. "I never wanted to get involved in this," he said, his voice broken, an echo of what had once been a powerful man. "Tyler knew the risk he was taking, but I always thought we could resolve things peacefully. I never imagined Stein would go this far." Ethan turned to him, his expression serious. "Stein isn't the type of man who leaves witnesses. He'll do whatever it takes to make sure the truth doesn't come out. But now you're in control, Westmore. If we expose this with Holloway's help, we can bring him down." The laptop's alert sounded, and Claire quickly checked the incoming message. "It's her," Claire announced, relief evident in her voice. Senator Holloway responded. "She wants to meet us in person tomorrow, at a secure location." Ethan took a deep breath, knowing that meeting would be crucial. But before they could celebrate, the distant sound of tires crunching on gravel made the three of them freeze. Claire ran to the window and peered through the curtain. "They found us," she said, her voice tense. "They're here." Ethan felt the wave of adrenaline surge through his body again. They needed to get out of there, and fast. The noise of car doors opening and muffled voices outside pushed Ethan to act. Every second was crucial. He exchanged a quick glance with Claire, who was already emptying her bag in search of something useful, and then with Westmore, who remained frozen, fear evident in his eyes. "We have no other choice," Ethan murmured. "We'll go out through the back window. We need to buy time until the meeting with Senator Holloway." Claire nodded but said nothing. Her hand trembled slightly as she carefully pushed open the window just enough for them to escape without being noticed. Outside, there was a small grassy area leading to a dense forest. It would be their only chance to escape without drawing attention. "Westmore, you go first," Ethan whispered, helping the senator to his feet. "Claire and I will cover you." The senator, still visibly shaken, crawled out of the window with Claire's assistance. Ethan watched as he disappeared into the darkness of the forest, his unsteady steps crushing the dry underbrush beneath him. When Claire followed, Ethan took one last look at the door, hoping the men outside hadn't yet noticed what they were doing. As soon as he slipped out, the sound of hurried footsteps in front of the motel confirmed his worst fear: the men had entered. Ethan hurried, guiding Claire and Westmore through the trees. There was no time for a complex plan. The focus was on surviving and reaching the meeting spot with Holloway. The walk through the dense forest was tense and silent. With every twig that snapped under their feet, Ethan braced himself for the sound of pursuers behind them. The rustling leaves and the cracking of small branches on the ground made his heart race, but he knew they had to keep moving. When they finally reached a dirt road, Ethan paused to assess the situation. They were far enough from the motel that the men wouldn't immediately locate them, but they were still not safe. "They won't stop," Westmore said, still panting. "I'm the next target. They won't let me leave alive." Ethan looked at the senator, his eyes filled with determination. "We won't let that happen. But now you need to trust us. Holloway will help us. We need to get to her." Claire, who had been monitoring her phone, looked at Ethan. "I've got confirmation on the meeting location. The senator is at a secure property about 50 miles from here. We can catch a car there." She checked the map and pointed out the direction they should take. Knowing that time was a constant enemy, Ethan led the group to the main road, where they waited for the taxi Claire had called. As the car finally approached, the three of them got in quickly, exchanging nervous glances, feeling that danger was still lurking. The ride was silent, except for the noise of the engine and the distant sound of sirens in the city. When they finally arrived at Holloway's property, the gates opened almost automatically. It was a secluded house, surrounded by tall fences and security cameras. Senator Grace Holloway herself was at the door, an imposing figure with a firm stance. "You've arrived," she said, her voice deep but welcoming. "Come in, we have a lot to discuss, and time is short." Inside the house, Holloway led them to a secure room. The thick walls and advanced technology indicated that she had taken every possible precaution. Once everyone was seated, the senator looked directly at Westmore. "Adam, I knew this day would come. When Tyler tried to approach me, I knew he was getting involved in something dangerous. But now I see that things are much more serious than we imagined. Did you bring the evidence?" Westmore nodded with difficulty, pulling out the documents he had brought from his bag, while Claire added the information they had collected. Holloway examined everything carefully, not taking her eyes off the papers. "Nicholas Stein has built an empire on control and intimidation," Holloway said, flipping through the documents. "But if these contracts, and the connection to the illegal drug tests, are exposed, he could fall. The problem is he has influence everywhere. It will be a battle to bring this to light." Ethan leaned forward, staring at the senator. "The FBI is compromised, the media is in Stein's hands, and we're without allies. We need your help to protect Westmore and ensure these documents reach the public." Holloway took a deep breath, absorbing the gravity of the request. "This won't be easy. It will require us to play dirty, like Stein, and use every available tool. But I'm in. If we can gain the support of some key figures in the Senate and secure international coverage, we can destroy his empire." Before they could continue, one of the property's security guards hurried into the room. "Senator, we have a problem. We've detected suspicious activity nearby. Stein may have discovered where we are." Ethan's eyes widened. There was no more time. They needed to act, and quickly. "We need to prepare for the worst," Holloway said, her expression grave. "Stein won't rest until he silences us." Ethan knew the final confrontation was imminent. The fate of Westmore, Claire, Holloway, and himself was now completely intertwined. Everything depended on what they did in the next few hours. The atmosphere thickened with tension as the security guard reported the suspicious activity. Ethan felt the weight of the moment. Nicholas Stein was not just watching from afar, he was acting. What lay ahead would be an inevitable confrontation, and the chances of getting out unscathed were shrinking with every passing second. "We need to evacuate immediately," Holloway said, taking charge with a firm stance. "We can't stay here waiting for them to surround us." "And where do we go?" Claire asked, quickly organizing the documents they had, her voice laden with urgency. Holloway looked directly at Ethan and Westmore. "We have a private plane ready for emergencies at a private airport less than 20 minutes away. If we can leave in time, I can ensure we get to Washington before Stein catches up with us. But we need to act now." Ethan nodded, adrenaline beginning to surge through his veins once more. "We'll split up. If he's already nearby, we should make it harder for them to track us. Westmore, you'll come with me and Holloway. Claire, you'll go with the security guard in the backup car." He looked at her firmly. "We need all the pieces in place when this blows up. I trust you to ensure the evidence reaches its destination." Claire hesitated for a brief moment, visibly concerned about the separation, but she knew Ethan was right. They needed to disperse the targets. "All right," she said finally, taking a deep breath. "But you need to be careful. We can't afford to lose anyone in this fight." Ethan gave a quick nod, and soon the group was on the move. The security guard led Claire to the backup car, while Holloway, Ethan, and Westmore raced toward the armored vehicle that would take them to the airport. The car sped down the narrow, winding road, the sound of tires on the wet asphalt filling the tense silence inside the vehicle. Westmore, still visibly shaken, couldn't take his eyes off the rearview mirror, as if expecting Stein's goons to appear behind them at any moment. "Grace," he began, his voice trembling, "do you really think we can bring down Stein? Even with all the power he has?" Holloway kept her gaze fixed on the road ahead, her expression stern. "If I didn't believe we could, I wouldn't be here. But it won't be easy, Adam. The key now is to ensure that the evidence gets into the right hands before Stein can cover everything up again." Ethan listened to the conversation but was divided in his thoughts. He couldn't stop worrying about Claire, fearing she might be intercepted on the way. There were so many variables, so many ways things could go wrong. But he knew Claire was strong, and he trusted her. Now, everything hinged on the flawless execution of the plan. When they arrived at the private airport, the environment was eerily quiet. A plane was already prepared on the tarmac, its engines ready for takeoff. They rushed toward the aircraft, but Ethan felt a sharp sense of alarm. Something was wrong. He stopped abruptly, and Holloway, noticing his hesitation, did the same. "What's wrong?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. Ethan scanned the area, looking for any signs of an ambush. The feeling of being watched intensified, and then he saw it. Off in the distance, two men in dark clothing were rapidly approaching the runway. "It's a trap!" Ethan shouted, already positioning himself to pull Westmore back toward the car. Before they could move, gunfire erupted on the runway. Holloway ran to shield Westmore, while Ethan drew a weapon he had taken from the guard earlier. He knew they were outnumbered and poorly prepared for a direct confrontation, but they had no choice. "Get on the plane!" Holloway shouted, her authoritative voice cutting through the sound of gunfire. Ethan, covering the senator, ran toward the aircraft's door while firing at the attackers. Stein's two men advanced swiftly, their steps calculated and precise, as if they knew exactly what they were doing. When they finally managed to get inside the plane, the door was slammed shut, and the pilot began to speed down the runway. But Ethan knew they weren't out of danger yet. He turned to Holloway and Westmore, both panting and sweating. "That was too close," Ethan said, trying to catch his breath. "They knew we'd be here." Holloway nodded, her face hard. "Stein has eyes everywhere. But now we have an advantage. We're heading to Washington, and hopefully, we'll stay off his radar long enough to expose the truth." The plane ascended into the sky, leaving the runway and Stein's henchmen behind. But Ethan knew that even while flying away, the fight was far from over. They had the evidence, they had allies, but Stein was a relentless enemy. The final battle was still to come. As Washington's cityscape approached on the horizon, Ethan's mind raced with what would happen next. The fate of all of them, Westmore, Claire, Holloway, and even his own, now hinged on the decisions they would make in the coming hours. And in the end, one thing was certain, someone wouldn't make it out alive. The plane landed smoothly in Washington, but the tension on board remained high. Ethan, Holloway, and Westmore disembarked, surrounded by a discreet team of the senator's security. Every move was cautious, they knew Stein would have contacts throughout the city. There was no room for mistakes. "We need to go directly to the secure bunker in the Capitol," Holloway said, her demeanor resolute. "There, we can hand over the evidence to the Ethics Committee and ensure Stein can't use his influence to silence everything." Ethan agreed, but his thoughts were with Claire. They had arranged to meet at a safe point not far from the Capitol. Since they separated, he hadn't heard from her. He checked his phone, but there were no messages, no updates. A knot formed in his stomach. "What's wrong?" Holloway asked, noticing the unease on his face. "Claire hasn't checked in," Ethan replied, his voice grave. "I'm worried. We can't lose contact now." "She's smart, she knows how to take care of herself," Holloway said, trying to reassure him. "But we need to keep moving. Stein is closing in on us, and we need to be quick." With no other choice, they climbed into an armored van that would take them directly to the Capitol. The streets of Washington passed swiftly by the window, but Ethan barely noticed the scenery. His focus was on making sure that the evidence reached the right hands and, more importantly, that Stein was finally exposed. Upon arriving at the Capitol, they were escorted through long, silent corridors, where security agents of the senator herself watched their every move. Eventually, they entered a room protected by layers of security. A group of senators from the Ethics Committee awaited, their expression serious. "Do you have the evidence?" Senator Logan asked, a robust and well-spoken figure, as he observed the newcomers intently. Holloway nodded, placing the folder full of documents on the glass table. "Here is all the evidence of Stein's fraudulent contracts, illegal tests, and his involvement in Tyler Lewis's death. It's more than enough to open a formal investigation. And with Westmore as a witness, we can ensure that everything comes to light." The senators exchanged glances as they began examining the contents. But Ethan, despite being in the secure room, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He stepped out for a moment, grabbing his phone again, trying to connect with Claire. This time, there was a message. "I need to meet you. Something went wrong. I'm at the press building outside the Capitol." Ethan read the message twice, feeling panic rise. Claire was in trouble. Without hesitation, he ran out of the room, ignoring the questioning looks of the security guards, and quickly headed to the building where Claire was. Arriving at the press building's entrance, Ethan spotted her from a distance. She was alone, pacing back and forth, visibly nervous. When she saw him, she ran towards him. "What happened?" he asked, pulling her aside to avoid curious glances. "I was followed," Claire said, her voice low and laden with tension. "When I separated from you, I noticed two men watching me from a distance. I managed to shake them off for a while, but they were looking for me. And that's not all." She handed an envelope to Ethan. It was thin, almost insignificant, but the emotional weight was enormous. "What is this?" he asked, confused. "Someone gave me this before I came here. It was an anonymous contact. They said that the evidence we have might not be enough. That Stein has allies within the Ethics Committee." Claire hesitated, her eyes worried. "Ethan, they might already know about our delivery. And even with all the evidence, they might try to silence it." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. This was exactly what he had feared from the beginning. Stein not only controlled the media and corporations, his influence extended to the very guardians of justice. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently. "Now." But before they could move, the two men Claire had described appeared around the corner of the building, blocking the exit. The look on their faces made it clear they were not there to chat. Ethan pulled Claire back, both of them quickly moving toward the building's side entrance. "We don't have much time," Claire said as they ran. "If Stein already knows we're here, he won't hesitate to eliminate us. We need to expose this another way," Ethan replied, his mind racing. "If the Ethics Committee is compromised, we need to go straight to the public." They reached the side exit and disappeared into the bustling streets of Washington, blending into the city's chaos. They knew they were being hunted, but they also knew they had one last card to play. Claire, ever prepared, pulled a disposable cell phone from her bag. "I have a contact in the press who hasn't been corrupted yet," she said, breathless. "If we can get the evidence to him, Stein won't be able to stop the truth from coming out. Not this time." Ethan agreed, knowing this was their last resort. There was no room for mistakes or hesitations. Now, it was a race against time, and against Nicholas Stein's power. As they ran through the streets, Ethan knew they were at the end of the line. The final confrontation was looming, and any wrong move could mean death for all of them. But they had no choice left. The fate of Westmore, Claire, Holloway, and the entire truth depended on what they did in the next few minutes. What did you think of the story? If you were in Ethan's shoes, how would you handle facing an enemy as powerful as Nicholas Stein? How would you solve the dilemma of trusting people who might be compromised? Remember to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to receive new legal thrillers full of suspense like this one. That way, you won't miss any updates and stay always informed about the next stories.